Hi everyone, and welcome to Take a Beat, where we take some time and chat about what we talked about in our services this past weekend.
Oh, I was afraid you were going to beat me when I was on Take a Beat. I feel much better.
Take a
Go
beat,
ahead.
not take a beating.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I'm here with Pastor Dave, and we're talking about this topic, why to have a better marriage. If you missed out on the sermon, it's online. It's on our YouTube channel. You can also connect with us on Instagram and Facebook. And, we have an online community as well. So you can connect with us, comment, like, subscribe. Wow. So why to have a better marriage? And so one of the things that was brought up, or you brought it up, Ephesians 5, was about the whole submission conversation. And that's a big deal for a lot of Christian community. It's usually people focus on that to talk to women. You need to submit to your husbands, or even to say women need to submit to men. And so can we kind of
Sure.
talk
I'd love
about
to go there. I'd love to go there. First of all, let me just throw a couple of things out really quick. There's nothing in there that says women submit to men. All right? The thing that's important there is verse 21, which is we submit to one another because of Christ. The one another only makes sense if both are submitting. Grammatically, there's no way to separate that whole discussion, right? So it's not women submitting to men. It's wives submitting to husbands by letting them lead. Remembering that, what does Jesus say? The servant is the greatest in the kingdom of God. So automatically, Jesus promotes all the women to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. Then the men, and as I pointed out, it takes 6 verses to explain to the men why they submit. The men submit by loving their wife. Everybody knows if men love their wives like Christ loved the church, the women are happy to let the men vote. How many wives do you know that sit in a car while their husband gets lost because he won't look at the map? Now, maybe that's an old illustration, but he won't pay attention to his phone. And they just sit there because they love him, and they're just, they're okay to let him be wrong. And that's harder for guys, but that's the whole important thing is it's mutual submission, or it can only be that. And the only reason for it, it's not even because he's male. It's because of Jesus.
Yeah. So with that whole conversation, and you mentioned this, it's a pretty radical thing for Paul to say. It's Paul, right? Yes.
Yeah, it's Paul.
For Paul to say to the audience at that time, because that culture was very much, like you said, patriarchal. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, he's talking, he's talking to the people in Ephesus. And Ephesus is it's a major city. Ephesus is it's like London. It's a major global city. It has all kinds of things going on. And one of the things that Ephesus does have that's interesting is this temple to Diana. And so there are a lot of powerful religious women in Ephesus. Yeah. And that's kind of an interesting part of the picture. But it's part of the Roman Empire. And so, all of the norms and everything else, everybody's imitating what the Romans do and stuff like that. And believe me, that's counterproductive, not counterproductive, it's countercultural. But the other stuff he says in there is way more countercultural. He says, if you're a slave, you've got to obey your master just like if he was Jesus. And if you're an owner, you've got to treat your slave as if he was your brother in Christ. Now, slavery as it was in the West, and the slavery of North Africans to the West and the New World, it's a horrible institution. All slavery is horrible.
Yeah.
The slavery in those days was not chattel slavery. It was not ethnically based, and people could redeem themselves, but it was still, you were still a slave, and it was miserable. And all of a sudden, Paul said, why didn't the church do something about it? Yeah, they did. Paul says, if you're a believer, you have to treat your slaves like brothers or sisters in Christ. Yeah. What he said about parents and children is staggering. Every aspect of what he said is just totally counterculture And so it should be understood in that context.
And I think that's good for us to step back and look at it as a whole, because that whole thesis of we need to submit to each other is not only in that context of husband and wives.
That's right.
And so a lot of the times we pick and choose what we want to see or what we want to read in the Bible. And so some people only focus on the husband and wife part, and sometimes only the wife part, and forget that this is a bigger picture, and it is a rewiring of how we live our lives as followers of Christ.
Yeah.
Right?
And don't forget, everything Paul said was countercultural. So there's no interest here in let's be like everybody so that everybody can see how happy we are and they'll want to be like us. No. Paul says we're going to do everything differently.
Yeah.
We're going to be sexually moral, right? We're going to be nice to each other. We're going to treat each other with respect. We're going to train our children instead of beating our children. You know that in Roman society, a father had to acknowledge a child that was born that was his. And if he chose not to acknowledge him, the child was put out and left for the elements to die.
What?
Yeah. So people talk about issues like that in our world today. That was an infanticide. That was like, I don't like this kid. He doesn't look good. He's not mine. And he's just left outside. One of the earliest things we learned about Christians is Christians used to go through the dung heaps and garbage areas of the Mediterranean world and rescue children.
Wow.
I've got some statistics on that in an old sermon. So just go, it's just staggering. The catacombs have hundreds of these small places where babies are buried and they don't even have a name or anything. But some Christian went and found them and did their best to make them better. And when they died, somebody gave them a decent burial, because that wasn't the Roman world. So everything Paul says is like so countercultural. Look, if somebody reads through Ephesians chapter 5 and all they can get out of that is wives are supposed to let their husbands make the decision once there's been a fair discussion. And any husband who doesn't have a fair discussion with his wife and listen to what she says is an idiot. All right? And anybody who only gets that passage is not really serious. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I'm kind of backing track to your first sermon in this Stronger Families series, where you talk about priorities. And so when we follow Jesus, when we obey God, then everything else gets reordered and reoriented according to
it gets in alignment.
Yes, in alignment.
Yeah.
And so I think...
Cheers, I've had a lot of coffee. I'm just going to cut you off one time.
No, that's fine. That was what came to mind, is like this whole thing that Paul was talking about in Ephesians with slaves and their owners and parents and children. It's that application of the reorienting or the realigning to like having God as your priority.
Yeah. One of the coolest things happening now is maybe not everybody's interested in this, but you all know about Pompeii. And Vesuvius went off and they buried all this stuff and a lot of people died, and they're continually excavating stuff and they're always finding new stuff there. And one of the coolest things about it is like when we read these letters, especially like the book of Romans, because Pompeii was a Roman city, and we read these things that are said, we wonder, what was the population really like? Well, we actually know, because we've got in this city of Pompeii, we have like an insula, which is think of it as like a condominium built around a courtyard where all these people lived. And we know like who lived there, what was their life like, and all those kind of things now. And then we understand, so a church would have been made up of those people. They're all small. I mean, like there's unless you're rich, nobody has a room bigger than this. So we're not talking about 300 people together singing with a rock band. Church was small, right? It was around a table, so it's a triclinium, but it's small, and that makes a difference. You got somebody in there who's a good person, and they own somebody else who was in there. And how do they treat them? How are they supposed to treat them? That's what Paul says. There's a way to handle this.
And I like that Paul addresses it. So he knows that it's awkward.
Oh, yeah.
And so Paul just addresses it. So I like that.
20% of the people were slaves.
Well, because that was the thing in that age, right? If they can't afford or pay for everything, they can actually become.
They can sell themselves,
Yeah.
or they can be put on trial and be sold to pay off their debts, which means that somebody later on could maybe buy their freedom, but maybe not. And in the meantime, yeah, it's not a good life. Nobody's saying it was. It's just not as horrible as was developed in the wicked eyes of men later. Yeah.
So we're talking about why to have a better marriage. And so you mentioned partnership in life. And I like that. I think for me, I always saw my parents and they were partners. So I'm just asking for stories now. What are some of the best thing about being a partner with Gigi and being in partnership with Gigi?
The most obviously good thing is that my clothes match. Yeah, when I was in school in Northwest, honestly, I met several people who thought I was colorblind because of the way I matched my clothes. And now my wife tells me what to wear. Nice shirt, PD. My wife picked it, Of course it's a nice shirt. Look, my wife is so talented. She's so charming. She's so many different things. But the best thing about her is that she loves me. And to be loved by somebody else, that's just the best thing. There are people that that have known me for a long time. And you can ask them if I'm the same man I was before I married her. And I'm not. I'm better because of her. Not because I want to make myself better for her. I'm not capable of making myself better. But she freed me a lot of my own insecurities. I always felt like nobody would ever really get me. And then she did. And that was good. I was a little bit sick one time, and I was saying to somebody, these old Stocko days, and I said to Pastor Bernard, I said, "Oh man, I'm feeling sick." And he says, "Are you hot?" And I said, "No, but Gigi thinks I am, and that's all I need." And that's really it. I mean, she really does know me, and she still stays with me.
Yeah, I think that's what you said. Someone who knows everything about you, your faults, have seen, like your bad habits, and still love you and still chooses to love you. I mean, I saw that in my parents' marriage. And I had a lot of conversations with my mom about how, like, she would say, we have very similar personalities, so strong, blunt, and she would always tell me that my dad softened her. Not like by force or anything,
but just the experience of being with somebody else changes you.
Yeah. And so it's always interesting for me to see. And one of the things you mentioned too is that when you see funerals and then people saying all of these great things about the people who have passed, but they often didn't say it when they were alive. So, and we talk about communication, how communication is key, and people talking about marriage always like, oh yeah, communication is key. But like, how can one start communicating better to their spouse or their children, do you think?
Yeah, the most important thing is to ask yourself, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to know? And then tell them, because they will never guess it.
Yeah.
And you might think, oh yeah, like this, like this, like this. I'll give you an example. Okay, so very early on, actually before we were even married, I'd buy some things for my wife. And I discovered that her taste and my taste are completely different in absolutely everything, right? So we like different things, we like different colors, we like different design, we like all kinds of different things. And it was really hard when we were first married because I wanted to give good gifts and I couldn't because I didn't know what they were. And I'd get something special, I'd give it to her and she's like, I don't like that. And and the reason she would do that, she was very honest with me. The reason she would do that is she said, I don't want you to think I like something I don't like, because then you'll get me another one. So it wasn't mean. It was just like she was communicating to me. And so the way we solved that is that at Christmas time or near her birthday or anniversary or whatever, she goes shopping. And in the old days, she would get a business card from the place and she'd write all the name and everything else like that. Now she takes a picture of it. Phones work better than business cards. And then she sends me all that stuff, and then I go look for it. I discover it. I look at it. I figure it out. I decide what we're buying. And she's surprised. And it's something she likes. That's just about jewelry. That works with everything in life. Do you know what your spouse likes to eat or doesn't like to eat? My dad was telling me one time he was with a couple and they were good friends of his, and they got in a restaurant and that guy always ordered for his wife. And I said, I'll have this and my wife will have this. And she said, I don't want that. He says, oh, but I always order for you. And she said, and I've never liked it. Yeah, and it was like, well, she wasn't supposed to speak up. And finally, you decided to speak up. Do you like, just everything.
So I know, there's this notion that, if you, it's romantic if you just know.
There's no such thing. There's not, one of the biggest advantages my wife and I have is our backgrounds are so different. Our cultural issues, and everything else are so different. Our background's a huge thing. So we know we're not going to make the same decisions. So we work at it. Yeah. She's not going to know this. And, we could have done better, and we can still do better, and we're going to do better. But, women, honestly, it's not possible for guys to know. It's just not possible. Our minds work differently. Yeah. Now I understand. You look. I have a niece who's a PhD in sociology and gender studies, so I know that it's not really a good thing to say those kind of things. But no matter what you say, there is a difference in the way most of the time, and there's a difference between every two human beings, and you need to communicate. This is what I want. This is what I don't want. What can I do for you? If I do this gesture. That is a good example. Okay, this morning I thought we weren't going to have a helper because I was confused what day it is, and so when my wife got up and she's fixing breakfast for me, I thought, how can I, she's fixing breakfast and we don't even have a helper to clean up afterwards, and what can I do? And then I remembered, my wife really likes that the bed's made. So I jumped up and I made the bed. And when I came out, I heard the helper and I realized it's not Friday, it's Saturday. So I made a nice gesture and it didn't mean anything. The helper would have done a better job. But I wanted to do that for her. And don't, this sounds like I'm such a good guy. I'm not a good guy, okay? I often say to people, can you imagine what it's like to be married to me? I always think I'm right. I always think I know better than anybody else. And I'm always willing to debate it. And I don't take it personally. I'm just usually right. And it would be horrible to be married to me. But I just wanted to do something for her. And it as it turned out, it wasn't something I needed to do. But I still did it. Yeah. It was still a gift to her.
Yeah, it's when you were preaching and you mentioned, you never, like, in these funerals, they say all of these great things about the person who has passed, but more often than not, they never told the person.
Yeah.
And my mind went back to, I may be also caffeinated because my mind's going all over the place. But so your daughter would sit, and I actually got her a T-shirt that says this. But she would sit in front of the TV, and we would be watching a show, and all of these characters on this TV drama thing who are just not communicating how they feel to the other person. And she's just sitting there yelling, tell her you love her, or tell him you love him. And so I'm just sitting there when you were preaching this sermon. I'm sitting there yelling in my head, tell her you love her, or tell him you love him.
Yeah. That's the best thing you can say to another person if you mean it. And it's horribly cruel if you don't.
Yeah. And I think just one more question or story. Impact on your kids. How have your parents' marriage, and this is my question to you, how have your parents' marriage impacted you?
Oh, enormously. Enormously. My parents weren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, though actually compared to most people I know, they were actually pretty perfect. They had reasons for the things they did. They had rules that made sense. And even, they would say to us at one point when we were growing up, you have to do this because I said so. But that's also understandable. Their commitment to each other was absolute. I remember how shocked I was when I was young and my mom said, "No, I love your dad more than I love you." And it just really bothered me. And then I realized, that really needed to be the foundation of everything. They were totally supportive of each other. They were always on each other's side. And, I just, every now and then, especially a little bit later when I was late in high school and stuff, and every now and then I'd get upset and get upset at mom sometimes. And I hated it because I knew that as soon as I kind of left the room and feeling bad, there's this knocking on the door and it'd be my dad, and he'd come in and he'd say, you have a terrific mom. And you have this misunderstanding going on today like this, but you can't forget how terrific she is and what a wonderful mom she is. And then I knew I would be over my feelings and everything would be fine. In fact, sometimes I wondered, Dad, it's time, And so I saw that, and so it was so important to them the way they raised us.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really, really terrific for Gigi and I is we've always felt that way together. We've always felt that way together, that what we did together needed to be a good thing for Isabel. And I'm not saying we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. She's more perfect than I am. But that's been that I inherited from them. And actually also inherited from my two great uncles and great aunts. Yeah.
And that's a big thing, I think, for me, that I know we're talking about marriages and families, but there are different people in our lives who impact us, even though they're not not our parents, but they're our spiritual parents, spiritual aunts and uncles, people who care for us and show us what it means to live godly lives. And so I love that story that you shared about your great uncles. Was it
Uncle James from Auburn? I was just thinking about it. I was trying to decide what to include in my sermon. When Marvin Rohde died, I made it count, and 6 times in my life I had no place to live, and the Rohdes gave me a place to live. Barbara and Rex Kennedy, when I was at Northwest, wonderful people. When I was feeling bad, I could call them up and they would come and pick me up and take me to their house. And I would usually just fall asleep on the carpet, And then when I woke up, after feeling nice to be in a home again, they would take me back. I mean, I've had those kind of people have enormous influence on my life.
Yeah. And so when you say, how you live your life impacts other people. Even if you're not married, you can be aunts and uncles to people.
Absolutely.
and or big sisters or big brothers.
Working on a better marriage is really important for singles, because whether they're married or not, working to be a better person for a marriage makes you a better person.
Yeah.
Right? So whether you're ever going to marry somebody or not, maybe you're going to get married again, maybe you're going to never get married again, maybe you've never been married, all those things are possible. But the work you do to be a better person to be married to makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much, PD, for sharing all of your stories. And so thank you for joining us this episode. And so tune in next week for Take a Beat.
Take a beating.